Welcome to the Legal One webinar regarding the opioid crisis in our public schools. This is obviously a critical issue that we have been addressing throughout the nation, and we're very happy to have an opportunity to talk with you about this important topic today. This is part of our Legal One webinar series, and we are going to be walking through a number of important topics together. My name is David Nash. I am the director of the Legal One program, and in a moment I'll introduce our co-presenters that we have with us this morning. Before I do that, for those of you who have ever been to a Legal One workshop or one of our webinars before, we do encourage you throughout our presentation to jump in if you have questions. You do have the opportunity to type those questions in, and we will respond to as many questions as we can. Throughout the webinar, we'll build in a number of points for us to do that. One quick disclaimer, as we walk through our program today, we encourage questions. For those who do ask questions about particular issues or incidents that you may have experienced, please don't take the information we're giving you as legal advice. Accept this as informational. We will treat any of those questions as hypothetical that we receive. But with that disclaimer, we do encourage you to type in any questions that you might have today. We also are providing supplemental materials, so everyone who is participating in today's webinar will have a copy of the PowerPoint that we're walking through. That PowerPoint also has embedded within it a number of additional links. Separate and apart from that, we also do have an article on the issue of substance abuse that is being provided electronically to participants. So we are giving you all access to those materials. In addition, we are recording today's webinar. So all of our participants, and even if somebody signed up and was unable to participate live, will have access to the archived recording of the webinar. As far as part of today's experience, your best experience would be on a desktop or a laptop rather than a smartphone, a tablet, or other mobile device, so we do encourage you to do that. As I said, we will follow up with an email, and we will make sure that all participants have access to the PowerPoint and an archive recording of the webinar. And as I said, throughout, please type in your questions, and we have built in a number of spots where we will pause to respond to questions. Today's program is part of an ongoing effort that we have here at Legal One and NJPSA and FEA to make sure we're doing all we can to help you address the needs of all of our students who may be struggling with drug or alcohol issues. This program is part of a Student Assistance Counselor School Law Certificate program that we are offering in partnership with the Association of Student Assistance Professionals of New Jersey. We're thrilled to have that partnership. In addition to today's webinar, many of you have signed up for the full certificate program that includes a March 15 workshop on emerging legal issues and requirements, and also an April 9th workshop on emerging trends in student use. We have also partnered, in addition to working with A.S.A.P. together we have both partnered with the New Jersey Prevention Network, and the three of us, the three organizations, are collectively offering a workshop on June 4th. That's a great follow-up to what we're doing today, that talks about evidence-based practices and programs for substance abuse and prevention. So this is part of a much larger effort to make sure we're giving you all the support we can on these really important topics. So with that, I do want to introduce the co-presenters that I have with me here today. I have Dr. Wayne Yankus. Dr. Yankus is past president of the New Jersey chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, a current school physician, and has been a real leader in the state of New Jersey and nationally on these issues. So Dr. Yankus, thank you for participating in this program.
You're welcome.
We also have Lori Todd. Lori is president of the Association of Student Assistance Professionals of New Jersey, is a practicing school administrator, and oversees the student assistance counselors in the Red Bank School District. So Lori, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Great to be partnering with you on this whole initiative. In addition to myself, we also have Rebecca Gold. Rebecca has joined us for all of our webinars, a retired administrator from the Lawrenceville School District, and has just been a great support for me and for us in developing a number of our workshops. So thank you, Rebecca.
A pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone.
And I did not have a chance to update our PowerPoint, but I also have joining us today Jim Sardo. Jim is a retired school administrator, is now coordinating our Leader to Leader program, which provides support for new school principals going through the mentoring process. And Jim has some real expertise on a practical level at dealing with students who are struggling with substance abuse issues. So Jim, thanks for being there too.
Thank you, Dave.
All right, so we're going to get ourselves started. A few goals that we have in mind throughout our webinar. Our time is short, but we're going to try to touch on a number of key issues. So we will review trends regarding the use of opioids. We're going to walk through understanding health issues that may arise related to students and their use. We're going to walk through legal requirements related to students who are suspected of being under the influence and some related legal requirements on prevention and counseling. And of course, we're going to try to help raise awareness about existing resources that are out there to help you help kids. So an ambitious agenda for our time, and we'll make sure to touch on all of these issues. Just to set the stage before I turn the program over to Lori, obviously there is a growing national recognition, and we see this here in New Jersey. And for all of you who are participating in this webinar, obviously you recognize how important the issue is too. We do have an opioid crisis. And that crisis has been recognized by our elected leaders at the state and national level. Governor Christie declared an opioid crisis in New Jersey as a public health emergency on January 17th of this year. President Trump later declared a public health emergency and recognized that the opioid crisis is a national public health emergency. The Centers for Disease Control has done a great deal of work at identifying and quantifying and addressing this issue. We have provided an article from the Centers for Disease Control. One of the startling things we see in the data is a 200% increase in the rate of overdose deaths involving opioids between 2000 and 2014. That is an incredible trend. And we also see that 61% of all drug overdose deaths are linked to opioids. So obviously we are dealing with a major crisis issue throughout our nation. Any opening comments recognizing that crisis, Dr. Yankus or Lori?
I think what's important to keep in mind is that these are startling figures, because when you go back to the 90s and the 80s, accidental death, car accidents, things like that were, in fact, the leading cause of death for young people in the United States under the age of 18, followed by cancer. This has really changed the whole picture of what leads to death in young people.
And Lori,
and I think one of the, and I'll touch on it in my section too, is, obviously we're seeing this epidemic and the deaths in, the 18 to 24, that young adult, 20-something population. But what we're dealing with in the schools is the aftermath of those deaths, and the siblings that are left, the children that are left, just the really reeling emotions from dealing with so many family members that are part of this crisis. So, I get a lot of questions a lot of times is, well, are you seeing it in the high school? Are you seeing it, yeah, we're definitely statewide seeing it in the high schools. However, what we're seeing more is having to deal with the deaths of family members, the deaths of friends, as a result of the opioid crisis.
So obviously the stakes couldn't be any higher, and we commend everyone who is part of today's webinar. With that, I do want to turn it over to Lori. As I mentioned, Lori is the president of the Association of Student Assistance Professionals of New Jersey. Lori, thank you for being here today, and anything you want to tell us about A.S.A.P.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be part of the webinar and to have this partnership with Legal One. So yes, I am the president of A.S.A.P.NJ, very proud to be the president of our association. I'm hoping, that I'm preaching to the choir with everyone that's on the line right now, that you know what SACs are and what we do, but just as an effort to explain, for those purposes, we're the ones in the schools who are dealing with all of the substance abuse and mental health issues. We're specifically trained through our course of study, specific certification from the Department of Education to be able to perform those services in the school. So I am, honored enough to be the president of our statewide association of student assistance professionals. And
one of the things that we did include in this PowerPoint a link to the statewide contacts for A.S.A.P.NJ too, so that is included on this slide.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly, if you have a question, if there's, who are you trying to get in touch with, up, from north to south, I can put you in touch with whoever that point person is in any of those schools or any of those counties. I have county chairs, throughout the entire state. So certainly I can be of assistance if you're looking for somebody to help. You can change it to the next slide, David. Okay. So as I said, we are seeing really, as I keep saying, very recently, an inordinate amount of issues going on each year, this school year particularly. As David mentioned, I am the SAC. I'm not an administrator. I am the SAC at Red Bank Regional High School. Aside from that, though, I can speak to what I'm hearing from all the members of our association, that statewide, we are seeing just significantly increasing numbers of kids dealing with severe mental health issues, severe social emotional issues, severe drug and alcohol issues, and not just, within themselves, as I mentioned before, with their family members. It's really very, very devastating, very debilitating to these kids to be dealing with what they're seeing, not only, in their own lives, but with their family members.
What really strikes me is that these issues are not in isolation. It's not as if, all right, this student has drug and alcohol issues, another student has mental health issues, another one has social and emotional. They all overlap.
No, they all overlap. And, what I get asked a lot, and I don't know if it's on the next slide or not, but, no, it's not. You can go back to the other one. Where does the pendulum swing right now? Which side is worse? Is it the mental health that you're seeing more? Is it the drugs and alcohol that you're seeing more? And there's always been that shift historically back, it's all mental health right now, and it's all drug and alcohol right now. We are seeing absolutely an equal amount of both issues, severe issues that these students are dealing with. And I always say to people that I'm talking to, if these kids are suffering with mental health issues, how do you think they're dealing with that? They're getting high. They're drinking. They're masking it in some way, shape, or form because they can't handle what's going on with them emotionally and with their mental health.
Absolutely.
So you can switch to the next slide, and I'll just piggyback that comment.
Yep.
How are they dealing with that? Well, they're dealing with that, through significant substance abuse. They're dealing with it in ways that, as you can see on the slide right now, that are very current trends that are going on. The edibles, the vaping, really, as a cliche, I'll say, because they have programs out there that are coming around talking about this, called hidden in plain sight. And kids are really escaping. They're getting high. They're, covering up what's going on with them right in front of all of our faces. So if you see the slide and, you can see the references to the edibles, the crock pot candy, right? And then the next slide, if you go back to the other slide, you'll see that there's candy, there's the ring pots, there's, this all has liquid marijuana in it. The hashies as a, reference to the Reese's peanut butter cups, but they're putting liquid marijuana into all of these these candies, these edibles, so that you're not smelling the weed anymore. You're not seeing these plumes of smoke. Like I usually have a slide in there of Jeff Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High coming out of his van, with his skater friends, falling out of the van before they go to school in the morning with this big plume of smoke coming out from them. That's not happening anymore. So what we're seeing, and with all these new drug trends and what we have to keep up with the times, are things like the edibles, the vaping. You can see in the middle of the slide there's a picture of somebody vaping. If you go to the next slide, you can see that the edibles, the liquid marijuana infused into the Jolly Ranchers, infused into the gummy bears, advertising, pot tarts. Who really is that marketed towards? I'm not going to the store, as an adult looking for something like that. It's marketed towards the kids and letting them really escape in plain sight in front of us.
I will say
Obviously,
this. I know administrators need to get really conversant with this. Jim Sardo, I spoke with him a lot about this issue. You sort of have to play detective, right, and recognize some of the things that kids are doing.
Well, if you look at the slide, if you don't mind, that has the vaping pipe on it. That's a very rare pipe now. You see the canister in there that they can put the liquid marijuana in, the butane hashish oil. But in the 60s, the potency of the marijuana was 0.75 to 3%. Today, it's around 18 to 20%. When you put it into liquid form, and if you do the dabbing, you are up to about 80% potency. And the pipes don't look like that. They look like makeup containers. They look like candy containers. So when a vice principal comes by that looks at an aspirator that looks like someone's taking Flovent, it's really a vaping pipe. So even in the classrooms, they can blow it into their bag clothing. It's called bagging, so that the teacher doesn't see it. When they turn around to the board and look back, the students are actually doing it in the classroom.
Yeah, kids are incredibly clever with this.
Right. And so I always challenge, whether I'm speaking to the faculty or, doing presentations, I always challenge people to say, look, how are you going to be able to tell the difference? If you saw somebody that had a bag of Jolly Ranchers, you would never know the difference between the picture that I have up on the on the screen right now, and a regular Jolly Rancher. There's no odor, there's no way of detecting, but there's liquid marijuana in this stuff. Are you really going to examine these gummy bears? They look like Sour Patch Kids, right? So how are you going to know the difference between what the kids are eating in the classroom and, is there liquid marijuana in it? Are they getting high right in front of me? Are they vaping right in front of me? I can't even, I did a whole presentation for our faculty last week, literally just on vaping. So I had an entire PowerPoint presentation just on vaping. It is a major statewide issue in the schools right now, and I know that there's a lot of discussion, and I would defer to the administrators on the line right now, but there's major discussion statewide among SACs, certainly, but also among superintendents, talking about what are we doing with the vaping? What are the policies that we're going to have to put in place? Is it drug paraphernalia? Are we going to drug test every kid? Is it a tobacco product? Are we suspending? It is a major, major issue right now statewide.
Of course, building on that, we are experiencing this opioid crisis, which is also very much linked to a heroin crisis, isn't it?
Right. Yep. And again, it's all of these new trends that we're keeping up with, and this heroin crisis, has been building, unfortunately, for several years. But right now, those numbers, those staggering numbers that you talked about earlier, and like I said before, the aftermath of this crisis is what's also leading to our students, mental health and emotional issues.
We have a question.
We have a question, but
we have a question about if marijuana becomes legal in New Jersey, which is what we're hearing about.
Oh boy.
The question is, of course, how it will affect the kids, the rules, things that you just mentioned.
Right.
Is it to your knowledge that at least our elected officials are asking for input from school officials on how to deal with this if it does become legal? I mean, we have other role models across the country, but the question deals with the effects on our rules with kids coming in, testing positive, staff members, etc. Is it your knowledge that at least they're including educators in this discussion?
I mean, Lori,
if you're asking me personally, if I, as the president of A.S.A.P.NJ, the student assistance counselors, the ones who are dealing with substance abuse in the schools, have I been contacted about any of this? Absolutely not. I have not
and
been.
I can tell you, as a pediatrician and a member of the Academy of Pediatrics, they aren't asking us either.
I will say this, that the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association, we haven't waited for folks to ask. We've been very assertive, and we are reaching out to legislators. There is legislation that's been introduced on this issue, so we're reaching out to our members. We're going to be reaching out to legislators and expressing our views on this, and you know, throwing some concerns out there for folks to consider. And I'm sure we'll work very with A.S.A.P.NJ, with pediatricians like Dr. Yankus, who's been a real leader on these issues, and
New Jersey, and NJPN, New Jersey Prevention Network, will surely be on board as well. But no, I'm not. You know, I was a part of a task force, the opiate task force through the Department of Education last year, but that was specifically about the opiates.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So again, if we go back to the slides, you know, I've been mentioning this, that, you know, there's even headlines, there's news reports, there's, you know, 2020s on the children and the siblings and the family members of dealing with the opioid crisis. You know, the grandparents, as you can see in the headline, grandparents having to become parents again because their children are not able to function enough to take care of their children. So grandparents are now having to come back into the parenting role as a result of all of this. So an entire disruption of the family system is coming out of this opioid crisis.
Some of the other headlines we're seeing you have here as well.
Well, so some of the other headlines, this is a different topic, not the opioid crisis, but this is about, you know, what else we're seeing in the schools, and the other trends that we're seeing is certainly involved with, you know, they call it academic doping. And so, you know, the kids that are taking Adderall, they're taking stimulants that aren't necessarily prescribed to them to be able to study. They call them study drugs. So, you know, to get through finals week, to get through AP testing, to get through, you know, staying up all night to be able to study for that test that they feel so much pressure that they have to pass. You know, certainly an increased number of abusing drugs that are not prescribed to them.
So this is
and again, you know, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is an interesting chart on the main reason why you last use a prescription drug without a prescription.
Right. So, you know, like I said, we're seeing significant pressures from the schools, significant self-imposed, externally imposed pressures on these students to perform and to do better and to, you know, get the A's, to get into that school. Because if I don't get into that school, then, you know, whatever black and white thinking they have. And so the study is showing here that you're seeing that why are you using a prescription drug that's not prescribed to you? That's, you know, basically the root of this question. And so the number one answer that the kids are answering is to help me relax. So that's a really big conversation piece. If you're so stressed out in your life as an adolescent with school, with your parents, with social media, with, you know, sports, everything that these kids are a part of, you're taking someone else's prescription drug to help you relax. That says a lot about what's going on with these kids emotionally and socially right now. And the means that they're choosing to relax.
Part of that is the inability of most adolescents to understand transition. That is, as Lori has said, you know, to help me relax. I've studied for 4 hours for the AP chemistry test, and now I've got to do X, and there's no time in between to relax and transition, take a breather, do whatever. You know, Robert Maslin, who was at Harvard many, many years ago and was one of the founders of adolescent medicine, you know, defined adolescence, the end of adolescence, as the ability to delay pleasure. Adolescents don't. And so using a drug to transition is what they see. It's often modeled on parent behavior, having a drink to go from one activity to calm down for another. So to help me relax doesn't surprise any of us at all as physicians.
Absolutely. So there are some obstacles, Lori, that we have to overcome.
Sure. Right. So, these are the things that we're dealing with as SACs in the school, the student assistance coordinators in the school, dealing with all these kids who are struggling with mental health issues. I always reference, we're on a block schedule at my school. So, these kids are sitting in class for 82 minutes. And even as, functioning adults, sometimes that's hard for us to sit through something for 82 minutes. So if you can imagine that being exacerbated by the mental health or, worrying about their dad or worrying about, one of their family members dealing with those mental health issues, that's pretty significant. Obviously, we still have 42 CFR, the federal confidentiality law applies to us only in the schools. The SAC is the only one that applies to in the school. So, the kids have that confidence, that ability to have protected information from us, with us in the schools. The helicopter and the lawnmower parents. I'm sure that everyone's heard of the helicopter parents before, but the lawnmower parents are really an interesting dynamic of making sure that they clear the path for their children that are behind them. If you can imagine someone mowing the lawn with a lawnmower, and you're getting rid of all the weeds and you're getting rid of all the high grass and all of the obstacles in front of you with that lawnmower, and your child is walking behind you in that nice, clear, clean, no problem, no obstacle path right behind you. So these parents are taking away all of the challenges, all of the decisions, all of the, coach didn't play me enough, all of that stuff the parents are dealing with ahead of them. And that kid's following right behind in that clear path doesn't have to deal with anything, doesn't have to make any decisions, doesn't have to learn any life lessons anymore.
Right. That's right.
And we talked about the testing and the academics.
That's right.
So we're, just in closing, ASAP-NJ, we certainly are, having statewide efforts, prevention, intervention. We advocate for our students. We do parent workshops, educating community members, all of that. That's our job as SACs in the schools.
Absolutely. And coordinating with outside support services, I'm sure,
right.
is a key too, right?
Yep. And
so
again, these are the things that we're doing, statewide. And I just want to plug a little bit on the last one, supporting recovery high schools. There is a brand new recovery high school starting in conjunction with the Matawan Aberdeen School District and Brookdale Community College. Starting January 2nd, we'll be opening. It's the second one in existence in the entire state of New Jersey. It is a unbelievable opportunity for kids who just don't have the support and, don't feel like they can go back to their school because of their recovery, that it will compromise their recovery. And I want to make sure that information is out there to everyone, that this is a really innovative program that's going to be starting in January.
And hopefully we can build on that in the future with some more opportunities like that. So there is legislation in New Jersey, the Overdose Prevention Act, that allows for the administration of Naloxone. Dr. Yankus, do you want to comment on that for a moment?
Yeah, this was a wonderful move by the legislature in terms of suggesting that schools look at this particular drug. Naloxone, much like epinephrine, is a relatively benign drug, but it has a wonderful effect. That is to say, if you don't have an opioid overdose, you're not going to hurt anybody by using naloxone. Naloxone is something we historically used for years in the delivery room to wake up babies whose mothers had too much anesthesia. And the dose, quite frankly, isn't much different. What we find, though, is it's life-saving. And your EMTs may have to do it again after you've done it at school, but you have only a certain number of minutes when somebody is in this fugue state to bring them around. Not doing it, particularly in some of our Central and South Jersey schools where there is a distance between the hospital and the school, could result in death. And so as a consequence, it's something we encourage as physicians, all schools, to have. We know that parents or people who have relatives who are suspected of overdosing can walk into a CVS or a Walgreens and buy this drug without a prescription. It is available. It is not cheap. However, it has affected most school budgets not adversely. For at least to be in the high school, But remember, you're also possibly going to use this for a faculty member, not just a student.
Yeah, so I would urge you all to go back and look at your district policies on this. This really could be life-saving in every school district to have this in place, and it really is something that we should all consider doing. So one last piece for you, Lori, just a quick review of some of the other things that STAC is responsible for.
Yeah, those are all the things that, I talked about earlier is what, we're specifically trained for. And I would encourage everyone really to, whatever district you're in, go back and find out who your SAC is. See if, the school that your children or your nieces or nephews go to have SACs. Make yourself aware of that person and what a resource we can be for families.
Great. So at this point, any questions, Rebecca?
We had a question about if you notice somebody who's in distress, the legality of forcing them to, whether it's a student or a staff member, the legality of forcing them to take a test, a drug test to,
So very important. We do have some slides on this later, but I'll mention this now. If you suspect a student may be under the influence, the #1 issue is addressing that student's health and safety. So there is a legal requirement that student must be sent for an immediate medical examination. And if a nurse assesses the student and believes there is an imminent emergency, we need to call an ambulance and get that student immediate care in that case. If a nurse assesses the student and believes that there is time, it is appropriate and permissible under New Jersey law for us to contact the parent. In fact, we're required to. And if the parent can come immediately, they can take the child to a family doctor. But I do have to stress that if the nurse believes that this is an imminent emergency and there is no time to waste, then you must call an ambulance and get that student immediate care. And Dr. Yankus, I'm sure you would vouch for the fact that, time is of the essence in a situation like that.
Right. What we teach all our school nurses to be on the side of student health and safety, but also on the side of safety for the school is if there is an alteration of vital signs or there is an alteration of the level of consciousness, you call 911. You get an ambulance in spite of parent protests and whatever. If you have alteration of vital signs or level of consciousness, do not wait.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to transition over to Dr. Yankus to talk about some of the health issues that could occur with opioid abuse and some of the resulting issues that come.
Let me just make mention, Lori has certainly mentioned some excellent points, and one of them, of course, is that this whole issue that we're dealing with students is a family disease. It has a lot to do with social dislocation. We have patients and students who are coming to school who have lost family members, lost parents. We have kids coming to school who are oftentimes have absences building up because they're caring for an adult at home who is addicted. So let's be sure we get some words clear here. First of all, we're dealing often in talking about the poison. When you read the popular press, everybody points to OxyContin, Vicodin, Percocets as being the villain. These are legal drugs. The patients are not also necessarily the villain, but you have to look at the patient as the person who's acting out. And that is, of course, in our community and on our schools. But our schools are a community. What we've learned over the years is that drug abuse histories are unreliable and laboratory testing is minimally helpful at best. What we do know, and Lori pointed this out, is that we have polydrug ingestion, and it's common. We have students that are depressed, and they're on antidepressant medication, but they have migraines. So they're occasionally on migraine medication with the antidepressant medicine, and occasionally they'll take somebody else's ADHD medicine to study for a test. So polypharmacy in our schools is not uncommon. And we've also learned in testing that drug diluents in vehicles sometimes can be more toxic than the ingested drug. So anything that affects mood can become addictive. And addiction has everything to do with rewards. And so there are a couple words that we really have to be careful of. Addiction is a brain disease. When you are addicted, you are altering your brain's nerve pathways and responses. Why is that important to adults? Because over time that can happen. But for adolescents whose brains are not formed until about their early 20s, adolescents have a 2-time possibility of addictive behavior altering their brain for a pathway of chronic addiction. But we see in most children things that are related to tolerance and dependence. You can be tolerant of a drug and not dependent on it, and you can be tolerant of a drug and become dependent, but it's not altering your brain and therefore not truly an addiction. When I say addiction is a learning disability, it's really what we say is most people can take 1 or 2 OxyContins after an operation where they've altered your body and it hurts and the drug works, and you then go on to take things like Advil and whatever, and you just simply resolve and you don't become addicted. But some people, particularly young people, will take that medicine and have the feel-good response and not ever remember that they want to move away from that feel-good. So the earlier the use of these drugs, the more physical need, which is the tolerance and therefore the dependence, which then ultimately leads to the rewards that are the addictive behavior. Just next slide, David. So what are the medical impacts of this use? And this is what we see in school. The kids with personality changes. We see the kids that suddenly, who are quite bright and doing well, aren't doing as well as they should. Sleep disorders. This is a big one because you find kids nowadays taking mom's Ambien because they've studied so late, they've got to catch 5 or 6 hours, so they'll pop a pill that's in mom or dad's room, and the behavior begins there in the family. You will see weight loss, the anxiety, and the depression as they become anxious about not having the medicine available through their contacts at school. I put in loss of libido because libido is an important part of adolescence. It's your sexual awakening, and what a lot of them don't realize is these drugs will stop that, and then ultimately there's always the cause of death. You know, we deal with a lot of addictions in school. We have gamers who are addicted, people who are addicted to caffeine, the Starbucks addiction. We have texting and smartphone addictions. Those are altering people's behavior, and ultimately that is a concern because it's interruptive of why you're in school. You're in school to be a student. You're in school to learn. You're in school for us to impart to you critical thinking. It's very hard to do that when you have a buzz on. But of course, for a lot of kids, this pathway to adolescent addiction is familial. We believe there probably is a genetic pattern in some users' biology that they are predisposed to this. We also believe that environment has a big difference, and Lori's pointed to the environment of schools as to the pressure and the pressure at home, where students have taken on a lot more responsibility nowadays than ever before. And also we have to understand the development, the developing brain, and how it affects the reward system. So the younger the beginning of use of any drug, the more likely you're going to alter that pattern of reward and neurotransmitters. Unlike many drugs, marijuana addictions tend not to be lifelong. However, while you're a heavy user, you are likely to have some significant cognitive and psychosocial impairments. And what we see is those are the kids that just don't care. They're the ones that are sort of, no problem, I don't care, no issue. And we are going to face that issue a little bit more as our colleagues in California and other states where medical marijuana has long been established, as they are allowed to use it at school for medical issues. And that begets other school issues. The impact on schools of medical marijuana will be, if you're taking it for your migraines, if that's one of the diagnoses that we will allow, how are you going to drive home? How are you planning to play sports after school? It's kind of like intellectual property. We've not caught up legally with some of the responsibilities that school have as this comes through, but it will. Regular users and early users, again, we have to be concerned. The earlier you start, the more likely it is an established pattern. A lot of kids deal with the issue of entitlements that their parents have given them, the entitlement of you're supposed to feel good, you're supposed to be happy, you're never supposed to be sad. Mom takes Valium to feel good. Dad pops the thing once in a while when his Xanax if he's nervous about his presentation at work tomorrow. Kids see that pattern and they see it early. They see the way that adults model behavior, and that therefore they feel no particular compulsion not to model that behavior themselves. Heavy users, of course, more than 20 times a month really are beginning to alter patterns in their brain. So what do you see? What we see, and some of these kids show up for their annual physical exam or their sports pre-participation physical already high. I've had that happen in my office as well. They come in thinking that we won't notice that their heart rate is faster than it should be, their blood pressure is elevated, they're breathing a little faster, and piloerection involves the hair in your body standing on end. It's not an uncommon response to if you popped a pill before you've come. Next slide. Complications, and this is something we need to be very clear about in our school community as we teach health. And that is to say, when you are on drugs, you let your guard down, you are seeking pleasure, you're looking for the rewards, or you're looking to erase pain and sorrow, so you're more likely to do things you wouldn't normally do. You're more likely to get into intimate behavior, which can lead to infection, pneumonia, and HIV. You're more likely to experiment with things up your nose and in your veins that can cause hepatitis C. And ultimately, in many respects, for our kids in some schools where they are on injected drug use, particularly heroin, you're beginning to see infections in bones that come from missing the spot. Our concern for these kids is, are we going to be on a constant search? Are we going to be looking out for them, or are we going to express concern? We care about you and your performance. We care about what maybe is not happening at home. The school isn't a social center for care and review, but on the other hand, most schools that do test, we are testing urine and we are testing breath. Saliva, blood, sweat, hair are not reliable, except blood can be reliable for LSD in those areas where you find it. You don't find that in urine as well. Again, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend drug testing at school because of the lack of reliability. These metabolites vanish from urine fairly quickly unless you're a chronic user. And if you are, we can't pinpoint when you actually used it. Was it at the dance on Friday or was it the Tuesday before? The same is true for blood testing. It can have varying levels, and it's very hard to pinpoint whether or not the school event was actually where the ingestion took place.
And I can't stress enough that drug testing is not a substitution for medical examination. I have heard of some districts that will simply have the student drug tested and then decide whether to send the student for medical examination. That's not what the law says.
No, the law requires an immediate exam. And by the way, the New Jersey law requires that an MD or DO, a physician licensed to practice medicine, not a nurse practitioner, not a physician assistant. That rule is very clear, and MD or DO is the only one who can sign that student back into school. Many schools have started working with local clinics or hospital clinics that are staffed by advanced practice nurses to do this work. It is not compliant with the New Jersey law. And I think schools need to review that. And remember, the law does not require drug testing. It requires the student be examined to determine that he or she is safe to return to the school community, thus making the school community safe. Most physicians will be happy to see their own patients as long as there's no alteration of vital signs or change in blood pressure or alteration of consciousness. On the other hand, you will never, ever go wrong to pass this on to the EMTs and to the hospital for evaluation. But clinics, unless they're staffed by a physician, MD or DO, will not be in compliance with the law.
So let me just take a moment to see if we have a question.
We have a question on, if you can comment, please, on random drug testing.
So school districts are permitted to put in place random drug testing policies. There is a process that you have to follow in order to put a policy like that in place. There would have to be documentation that there is a drug or alcohol use issue in that school. Unfortunately, probably any school in the country, high school or many middle schools, could document that those issues do exist. You would have to have public hearings on that prior to adopting the board policy. It could be linked to participation in extracurricular activities, including athletics, for students who are involved in random drug testing. There cannot be other forms of discipline separate and apart from potential suspension from participation in the extracurriculars or athletics. So you can't punish kids who you identify through a random program, but you are required, obviously, to provide counseling and support for those students. Any other comments, Wayne or Lori, on random drug testing?
Yeah, you know, many schools do it. Again, most schools will send the urine out to be tested to laboratories that do it for corporations and companies and New Jersey Transit and the like. Again, random is random, and it's very hard to do random drug testing in schools and make it accurate. And our concern always is that the issue of drug testing is not necessarily reliable. We understand that corporations do it, and they will do testing on people. But again, we are looking at the safety of the school community. It's really up to the parent and the individual medical home if they want to get into drug testing the student. Now, it's different if you're court-ordered. And that if you're court-ordered to test, then you are doing a chain of custody, which is very different than having the kid go in the bathroom and just pee.
And even for random testing, it's very challenging for districts to be in the business of handling this on school grounds. So I think that's an important caution to put out there. So let me jump ahead. There is recently adopted legislation that I want to make sure folks are aware of. It requires a review of our standards here in New Jersey to ensure guidance for substance abuse instruction is provided to school districts. We want to make sure that districts are required to be incorporating evidence-based standards and practices. So we have here at NJPSA and Legal One been working closely with A.S.A.P. and the New Jersey Prevention Network on this issue. There is a need to identify evidence-based programs, and we are working closely with those groups to put together information that we can share with school districts. Lori, do you want to comment on that issue at all?
I do. I want to, add that certainly anybody who's on this call right now or as a participant, please take this back to your school districts, to your health and PE teachers, to your health and PE supervisors, to, really understand that this is legislation coming down from the governor's office, that we are having research-based and evidence-based programs in the curriculum. So, this is not something that, we just decided to come up with another seminar on. This is something that, schools are going to be held, for compliance with the Department of Ed and the governor's office.
And that's a high standard, evidence-based standards and practices. So these aren't just programs that somebody says work. There are standards that go with an evidence-based designation. So we are working together, Legal One, A.S.A.P. NJ, and New Jersey Prevention Network, and obviously the Department of Education, to try to make sure that that information is provided to all school districts relatively soon on what those evidence-based programs are. Important to understand everyone's role in the process. Many of those on this call might be a SAC or a school nurse, and obviously those positions have a critical role to play in this whole process. School principal ultimately is responsible for ensuring that we've got all the policies and procedures in place to keep all kids safe. That includes our programs on substance abuse prevention. and making sure that we appropriately respond to any kids who might be in crisis. Every staff member in a school district has a legal obligation. Every staff member needs to be trained on the signs that kids might be under the influence, needs to understand their requirement for immediate reporting with no delay if they believe somebody is under the influence. We do still see some hesitancy here. We have some districts where the culture is that the staff doesn't want to be the one who is blamed for reporting that a student might be under the influence. So even though the staff member suspects it, in some districts, the person is simply sent to the nurse's office and there is no report being made by that staff member. They suspect the person is under the influence. Time matters. A well-trained nurse will recognize signs, but if another staff member saw something, there should not and cannot be a delay in reporting that person might be under the influence. Those seconds or minutes could make a big difference. And Dr. Yankus reinforced that as well. So we certainly want to recognize that, and obviously parents can be incredibly helpful. We want parents to reach out to us if they have concerns about their kids, and the only way to really address this issue fully is for students to be willing to come forward and help each other and identify other kids who might be in trouble, either dealing with addiction issues or an imminent situation.
And I'll put a pitch in for the school doctor as well. Do not be afraid to tap the resources of your school physician or physicians, as the case may be, to partner with you all because we're all seeking for student health and safety at school.
Yeah, and the school physician has an incredibly important role, so I'm glad you did mention that, Dr. Yankus. One question that I often get is about sharing information. Who is allowed to know if a student is dealing with a drug or alcohol addiction issue? So there are confidentiality requirements built into federal law, and if we have a student who is voluntarily participating in a drug and alcohol counseling program, they're likely going to be sharing some very sensitive information about their own personal use, perhaps the use of other family members, and federal law says that that information is going to remain confidential. We do have situations that come up where school officials do have a legitimate educational interest in understanding certain information about students. So certainly a school principal has a legitimate educational interest. If a student is suspected of being under the influence, that person is required to receive that information immediately. School nurse has a legitimate educational interest. If a student is struggling with some addiction issues and needs the assistance or support of the school nurse. If somebody is struggling with other health issues, obviously a school nurse would have a legitimate interest in that information. There are times where a student might be subject to seizures in different situations, and perhaps a bus driver or a coach needs to have some medical information regarding that student. So all that has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, but there are times where staff members do have a legitimate educational interest in information regarding a student's health status. So we do want to recognize that. And nurses should be part of that discussion. The school physician should be part of that discussion in determining whether there's medical information regarding students that others in the school setting need to know. And as I mentioned, those others, in some cases, could be very broad. A bus driver might need to know some information about a student who's susceptible to seizures. And other staff members might need to have specific information in particular circumstances as well. So all information about student or staff members' involvement, as I said, in a drug or alcohol counseling program is assumed to be confidential unless we have a student who is in clear and present danger. A student, for example, under the influence or suspected of being under the influence at that moment that they're in the counseling program, there would have to be a report of that. But the assumption is that the information shared in that counseling program is to remain confidential. And that is built into federal law, 42 CFR Part 2. There are certain mandatory disclosures even in federal law. So a child is in a comprehensive drug and alcohol counseling program, but they talk about an abusive situation in the home and talk about how they may be being abused by a parent or someone else in that home. That information must be reported, even if it's part of the comprehensive drug or alcohol counseling program. So we do see some other permissive disclosures here as well. So student confidentiality, we have to report if somebody's suspected of being under the influence, of course, if they're in imminent danger of harm to self or others, if they're a victim of bullying or may have engaged in bullying, if they're involved in drug distribution activities. So if you're at a counseling session and you talk about bringing, for example, prescription drugs to school and passing them out to your friends, that is drug distribution activity that actually does need to be reported to the principal and to law enforcement. So here's a breakdown of some of the reporting requirements. This is specifically talking about students suspected of being under the influence and the legal requirement to report that. If a student is suspected of using steroids, there is a similar requirement for that to be reported as well, and staff should be trained on the signs that a student may also be using steroids. So a Board of Education is required to have in place a comprehensive substance abuse prevention program, and this lays out the standards for that program. There does have to be professional development for all staff. We do want to go back after this session and ask how effective your current professional development is. Are staff accurately recognizing whether students might be under the influence? There are administrative code provisions that come into play when we're looking at district policies. So we do give you the code citations here so you can make sure your program is meeting all the legal standards. There is case law. Very famous case for CEFO versus the Wayne School District. We had a tenured assistant principal who received a report that a student may be under the influence. That person, along with the nurse, assessed the student, decided not to send the student out for a medical examination, and had made a similar decision over the years. And in one case, the student died of a drug overdose after having not been sent out. Tenure charges were brought in that case, and the commissioner made clear as a result of that case that we must send students out for medical examination whenever we receive a report, as long as the staff member making the report can articulate some indicator, some reason why they think a person is under the influence. So the nurse does not have the ability to override that decision if there is a referral made. There are limits on confidentiality. A SAC learns about a student who might be distributing drugs. We had a case where a SAC actually tried to undo a drug deal, and that person had tenure charges brought against her, and they were sustained. So obviously we can't do that. There is immunity for reporters. For those of you who make a report, what if you are wrong? You suspect somebody's under the influence. Now they're upset at you. Now their parents are upset at you, and there's a threat of litigation. You are indemnified. You are fully protected in those cases. Obviously, we want to err on the side of protecting student safety. So we don't want to have a fear that if we make that report and we're wrong, that we're going to be subject to any liability. We do have some resources here that are listed for you. There are some tremendous resources available to help you, so we encourage you to go back to your school district, access some of these resources, and look at the program that you have in place currently. Final question?
I would add, David, I would add New Jersey Prevention Network as another resource on there as well. Yes,
and we should have listed that. So New Jersey Prevention Network is an incredible resource that we would encourage you to take advantage of, and we'll include information on that.
We have a number of questions on the responsibilities of the SAC if they weren't informed, for instance, of somebody who is under the influence, and also a very interesting question about a SAC doing new employee screenings, which generally are done with the school physician, and that takes up so much of their time and takes it away from the kids. But generally, the legal responsibility of the SAC if they're not aware.
So a SAC is only going to be held responsible for information that you knew, or this does raise some concerns, or should have known. So if a SAC is unaware that a student is involved in drug distribution activities or is in school under the influence, you're not going to be responsible for that. You're not a mind reader just because a student has come to you for counseling about a general drug or alcohol addiction issue. On the other hand, a student comes to you and they're exhibiting some obvious signs that you should have learned in your training, and we're not seeing those signs or not reporting that student, now a SAC could have some liability. So it's a reasonable person standard, and you're only responsible for the information you actually have, not for information that's being hidden from you by others.
And also new employees.
New employees, it really doesn't sound like the role of the SAC to be involved in screening new employees, so I think that's a misuse of the SAC's time, and I would imagine that Lori would agree with that.
Yes, and as David always says, if you're in the same bargaining unit as the person that you're dealing with, that's a conflict of interest. So I'm not really sure where that question would be coming from, or that's, in my opinion, completely inappropriate. So.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this program, I do just want to point out to you that today's webinar is part of a series that we're offering this year on a number of really critical topics for those who are interested. Archived versions of the ones that we've already done are available, or the entire series is available for folks at a discounted price. And we do also give you here a link for access to the Legal One website for additional information and to key information on the Department of Education website. So I do want to thank our presenters today. Dr. Yankus, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
I was a high school teacher before I became a pediatrician. Hats off to all of you for the good work that you're doing.
Absolutely. And Lori, thank you as well for all of your work.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Jem, thank you for being part of the program.
No, thank you very much.
And of course, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So this program will be made available to you. We will be providing an archive of it. Thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.